Hand me your ID, the teller snapped, tossing it onto the counter as if it were trash. Excuse me? She said, reaching for it, but he ignored her, staring at her with clear judgment. I said now, he barked, his voice rising, as if the words alone could assert authority. I'm asking politely, she replied, keeping her tone steady. There's no need for this. You think you belong here? He sneered, glancing around as if seeking agreement from the other customers. Around them, other customers shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension. What they didn't know, this wasn't just any woman. Her presence carried authority, and underestimating her could lead to consequences they weren't prepared for. Would you stay silent, or would you make them regret underestimating you? Comment below if you would stand your ground, and subscribe to see how this confrontation changed everything. The morning sun spilled across the city streets, glinting off polished glass towers and hurried footsteps. Breonna Parker moved with quiet confidence, her heels clicking softly against the marble lobby of the bank. Known in her circles as a decisive and capable businesswoman, she had built her career on sharp instincts and unwavering professionalism. Today, she carried a folder neatly stacked with documents, prepared for what she expected to be a routine meeting. Years of experience had taught her to handle countless situations calmly, but something in the air hinted that today would be different. She approached the teller with a polite smile. Good morning, Breonna said, her voice steady and professional. The teller didn't return it. He barely looked up. His fingers tapped impatiently against the counter. Your ID, he said, abrupt and dismissive. Breonna reached for her wallet, but he stepped forward slightly, his eyes sharp and judgmental. Excuse me? She asked, calm but firm. Around them, the quiet murmur of other customers filled the air. Some shifted in their seats, sensing the tension, though none could yet understand why. Hand me your ID. Now. His words cut through the room, commanding attention. Breonna paused, not out of hesitation, but to assess the situation. Years of navigating spaces where judgment came faster than courtesy had taught her to read these moments carefully. I'm asking politely, she said, keeping her tone measured. There's no need for this. He smirked, leaning slightly closer, as if proximity alone could assert power. You think you belong here? He sneered, glancing around to see if others would side with him. A few customers shifted uneasily. Whispers of, is this normal? And, wow, barely escaped lips, yet carried weight. Breonna met his gaze without faltering. I belong wherever I need to, she said, steady and unwavering. For a moment, silence fell. The air seemed to hold its breath. The teller's fingers drummed impatiently against the counter again. I said now. His tone carried the weight of authority, or at least the pretense of it. Breonna kept her posture composed, her voice calm but resolute. I've already reached for it. There's no reason for this hostility. Around them, a few customers turned, curious, whispering quietly. Some exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the unfairness in the exchange but unsure whether to intervene. One older man muttered under his breath, That's uncalled for. The teller didn't hear him, or chose to ignore it. Instead, he leaned further forward, his smirk widening. You're making this difficult. Do you always challenge authority? Breonna held his gaze steadily. I challenge disrespect wherever I see it, she said. I expect the same professionalism from anyone I deal with. A woman waiting in line coughed lightly, shifting her bag, but her eyes stayed locked on the unfolding scene. Tension had grown thick in the air, a quiet pressure that seemed to press on every bystander in the room. People felt the injustice before they understood it. The teller's voice sharpened. This isn't a debate. Hand me your ID now, or we'll have a problem. Breonna didn't move immediately. Instead, she observed the people around them, noting who might be witnesses if the situation escalated. Every action mattered. Every word could either escalate or expose the unfair treatment. She chose her next words carefully. I'm standing here cooperating, she said, her tone unwavering, but I will not accept being treated as if I'm less than any other customer. I expect my ID to be returned with respect. A murmur ran through the room. Some customers nodded slightly. Others looked away, uncomfortable with confrontation, but unable to ignore the injustice. The teller's expression tightened, frustration flickering across his face. He picked up her ID from the counter, then paused, hesitating just enough to make Breonna notice. This wasn't simply a routine check anymore. This was about control, and he was testing the limits of hers. Breonna held her ground. Every second of hesitation on his part was a victory in itself. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make sudden moves. Instead, she let his uncertainty and the eyes of the onlookers do the work for her. Somewhere in the back of the room, a manager's footsteps echoed, approaching slowly but deliberately. The tension shifted slightly, a new dynamic entering the room. The teller seemed aware, his bravado wavering, yet he didn't relinquish control completely. Breonna could feel the moment tipping, the energy in the room waiting for resolution. And though no one knew yet, this confrontation would have consequences far beyond the four walls of the bank. The bank seemed to shrink around them. Every sound, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of conversations, the distant hum of ATMs, felt amplified against the growing storm at the counter. "Hand it over now," the teller barked again, this time his tone sharp enough to draw glances from every corner of the bank. He pushed the ID slightly toward her, but not enough for her to take it. Before Breonna could respond, a young bank assistant stepped forward. "Sir, please, she needs to follow the protocol. You're making this difficult," he said, his words laced with impatience, his posture rigid. Breonna's eyes swept over him briefly. The tension wasn't just with the teller. It had now spread to others who believed authority meant control, rather than fairness. "I am following protocol," she said, measured. "All I ask is to be treated with respect." The teller laughed, short, sharp, dismissive. "Respect? You want respect? You're trying to bend the rules. This is a bank, not a place for lectures." "You mean a place where some people are treated differently than others," Breonna corrected, her words precise, leaving no room for misinterpretation. The hum of whispers grew among the bystanders. A young woman near the counter shook her head in disbelief. The teller's smirk faltered slightly, replaced by a flash of irritation. He leaned closer, voice low but menacing. "You think you can talk to me like this?" "I don't think. I know," Breonna said calmly. "I've been underestimated before, and it rarely works out for those who do it." A few more staff members gathered around, glancing at each other, unsure whether to step in or let the confrontation continue. One middle-aged woman behind the counter muttered under her breath, "Why is she making this such a scene?" Breonna's gaze didn't waver. "I'm not making a scene," she said. "I'm standing here. That's all." The teller's frustration escalated, and in a swift motion, he tossed her ID onto the counter, as if discarding something worthless. It slid across the surface, stopping just short of her hands. Gasps echoed from the line of customers. Breonna leaned slightly forward, eyes fixed on him, her voice steady but firm. "Is that how you treat everyone?" she asked, letting the question hang in the charged silence. The bank assistant glanced nervously at the manager's office, then back at the teller, whose aggressive stance had begun to falter. But he wasn't done yet. His need to assert dominance had been challenged, and he wasn't willing to step down so easily. Bystanders now murmured openly, some leaning closer, others standing rigid in uncomfortable anticipation. Every word, every movement, every glance was magnified in the tension-charged room. Breonna knew this moment would define the rest of the interaction. How she responded now could either escalate the situation beyond control or expose the injustice in a way no one present could ignore. The ID lay inches from Breonna's hands, a small object that now carried the weight of humiliation, injustice, and power. The teller's face was tight with frustration, his smirk gone, replaced by a restless impatience that seemed to crack the carefully constructed illusion of control he had tried to maintain. "Pick it up," he said, voice low, almost a growl now, as if commanding obedience could erase his earlier display of arrogance. Breonna didn't reach for it immediately. Instead, she let the silence linger, letting the absurdity of the act sink in for everyone watching. The teller's glare shifted, irritation flickering into uncertainty. The murmurs of customers grew louder. Some shook their heads. Some whispered sharp criticisms. Others stayed frozen, caught in the intensity. "Do you always treat people like this?" Breonna asked, her tone quiet but cutting, piercing through the tension. "Do you think tossing someone's ID on a counter proves anything?" The teller's jaw tightened. Not physically noted, but the sharpness in his tone revealed it. "This isn't personal," he snapped, though everyone could hear the strain in his words. From the side, a staff member chimed in, voice tense. "Sir, please calm down. We don't want this to escalate." But his attempt only highlighted the dissonance. One staff member trying to enforce order, while another actively contributed to the tension. Breonna finally picked up the ID. Her movements were precise, deliberate, unhurried. Every eye in the room followed her. A quiet power emanated from her, one that did not rely on aggression, but on a controlled presence that demanded attention. "You see," she said, holding the ID steady, "cooperation doesn't require humiliation." The teller's face flushed, his aggressive posture faltering. Even the assistant, who had tried to assert authority earlier, glanced nervously at his colleague. Customers now leaned forward, some snapping discreet photos with their phones, others murmuring in disbelief. At that moment, a manager appeared, walking briskly toward the counter. The energy in the room shifted instantly. The teller hesitated, caught between asserting dominance and answering to a higher authority. Breonna kept her composure, making no sudden moves, but the quiet confidence she radiated filled the space more powerfully than anyone's words could. "You've caused a scene," the manager said, voice measured but firm. "Let's resolve this professionally." Breonna's gaze remained steady on the teller. "Professionalism," she said simply, "is respecting everyone equally. That's all I ask." The teller looked around, realizing that the audience, the customers, the staff, the manager, was no longer on his side. For the first time, he sensed the imbalance of power, even if he didn't yet know the full measure of it. And in that charged moment, Breonna understood something vital. This encounter would not end quietly, and the world outside these walls would hear about what just happened. The manager stood between the teller and Breonna, a quiet authority filling the space that had been tense only moments ago. Customers settled back into their seats, some still whispering, others shaking their heads in disbelief. The air was thick with questions, judgment, and the weight of what had just occurred. The teller's hands rested on the counter, stiff, his earlier bravado gone. He muttered something under his breath, barely audible, as if trying to reclaim some fragment of control. But the energy in the room had shifted. Every eye, every presence, had silently sided with Breonna. "Is there anything else?" the manager asked, his voice firm. Breonna's eyes scanned the room. The staff, once tense and defensive, now avoided direct eye contact, as if recognizing the mistake they had been complicit in. She allowed a brief nod, her words controlled and calm. "No, that will be all," she said. As she turned to leave, a few customers followed with glances filled with admiration, curiosity, or disbelief. Murmurs followed her path. "Who is she?" someone whispered. "She handled that perfectly." Breonna didn't respond. She moved with quiet purpose, aware that her every action had been observed, measured, and cataloged. Not just by the teller or staff, but by everyone who had witnessed her composure. The encounter, though brief, had sent ripples beyond the counter. Once outside the bank, Breonna took a moment, adjusting the folder under her arm. Her mind wasn't on anger or humiliation. It was on strategy. Every interaction, every word, every subtle reaction she had displayed would serve her later. She thought about the larger world she operated in, a world where perception could be manipulated and power often underestimated. Today had reminded her that even the smallest encounter could become a statement, and this one had been noticed. Somewhere behind her, a customer whispered to another, "I can't believe he treated her like that." Another nodded, adding, She didn't even raise her voice. That's something else. Breonna smiled faintly, not from vanity, but from understanding. The moment had done its work. A lesson had been delivered, not with shouts or threats, but with presence, precision, and dignity. And though no one yet knew the full measure of her influence, there was a sense in the air that this encounter was just the beginning. The world was watching, and Breonna Parker was ready. Back in her office later that day, Breonna set the folder on her desk and allowed herself a brief moment to review her schedule. Meetings, calls, and decisions awaited, but none could distract her from the memory of the morning. The encounter at the bank had been minor in scope, but major in implication. She tapped her fingers lightly on the desk, thinking not of anger, but of strategy. Small acts of bias, unchecked arrogance, and dismissive authority were often indicators of a larger culture, one that assumed influence could be ignored or diminished. But Breonna had learned to read these cues. They were signs of underestimation, a dangerous mistake for anyone dealing with her. Across the city, her reputation was quietly formidable. Partners, colleagues, and competitors alike knew Breonna Parker not just for her decisions, but for her ability to navigate power with precision. When she entered a room, subtle shifts occurred. Contracts were reconsidered, alliances measured, and authority recalibrated. Yet today had reminded her that influence outside her professional circles could still be tested. The teller, the bank staff, even some customers, they had acted as if her presence held no weight. And for a fleeting moment, they were right. In their eyes, she was just another customer. But Breonna understood the truth. Perception was temporary, and actions had consequences. Every slight, every dismissal was an opportunity to expose injustice. Her phone buzzed. An assistant's message. The meeting with the client has confirmed the schedule. Everything is ready. Breonna smiled faintly. That client represented one of several critical partnerships that defined her company's operations. The details were confidential, but the importance was immense. Mistakes, biases, or underestimations, like the one she had faced this morning, could ripple far beyond the immediate moment. And that ripple had begun today. Even as she reviewed her plans, Breonna knew one thing. The world would eventually see the full measure of what she brought to the table. Today had been a reminder, not a setback. The next steps were clear, and her influence would reach far beyond the walls of that bank. By mid-afternoon, Breonna was in a conference room, the city skyline stretching beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. Her team was assembled, reviewing updates on critical operations. Her mind, however, kept returning to the bank encounter. The subtle arrogance, the dismissive gestures, the way authority had been wielded without thought. It was a small moment, but small moments often had larger consequences. In Breonna's world, perception mattered, influence mattered, and every interaction could either build or erode trust. Her assistant slid a tablet across the table. "We've received preliminary feedback from the bank," she said. "Some of the staff have reported the incident. Word is spreading." Breonna didn't need to look at the screen to understand. The ripple had begun. Her calm composure earlier, witnessed by staff and customers, was already creating conversations. Quiet, behind the scenes, but potent. Whispers of respect, admiration, and even doubt about the teller's behavior were circulating. "This is exactly why we stay aware," Breonna said. Her voice was steady, precise. Every interaction, every observation can influence perception, and perception can change outcomes. Her team nodded. They knew that her company dealt in high-stakes partnerships. A misstep, a slight, or an underestimation, even from someone as seemingly insignificant as a bank teller, could have unexpected consequences. Breonna's mind worked in layers, connecting events that others might dismiss as unrelated. Meanwhile, back at the bank, murmurs had already reached higher management. Staff recounted the scene in hushed tones, the tension, and the calm authority Breonna had shown. Some felt admiration, others unease. None could ignore it. Breonna considered the broader picture. Every interaction had the potential to escalate, to expose attitudes that were often hidden behind smiles and protocol. Today, the teller and the supporting staff had revealed more about their assumptions than they realized. Her phone buzzed again. A message from a senior partner. "Call me when you're free. We need to discuss a new development." Breonna allowed herself a brief smile. The events at the bank were no longer contained. They had begun intersecting with the wider web of influence, power, and stakes she navigated every day. Small acts of disrespect had consequences, and the world was about to see just how far her reach extended. By late afternoon, word of the bank incident had traveled beyond the branch. Staff discussions, whispered comments, and subtle reports had begun making their way up the chain of command. The teller's insistence on authority and the supporting staff's complicity were now drawing attention that no one at the branch could have anticipated. Back in her office, Breonna reviewed emails and messages. Nothing overtly alarming had arrived yet, but the patterns were clear. The incident wasn't isolated. Its effects were spreading quietly but powerfully. Her assistant hesitated before speaking. "Some of the bank's senior management are requesting a meeting. They want to discuss the morning incident and potential implications." Breonna nodded slowly. She had expected as much. "Good," she said. "We will handle it, but on our terms." This was no longer just a confrontation over an ID or a display of prejudice. It had begun to intersect with the systems and structures that govern partnerships, operations, and influence. In her world, every interaction, even the smallest one, could have consequences. Across town, the teller returned to his duties, trying to restore a sense of normalcy, but the quiet unease followed him. Supporting staff whispered about what had happened. Some admired Breonna's composure. Others feared the repercussions. Meanwhile, Breonna began preparing strategically, not in anger, not in retaliation, but in calculated action. Every step she had taken at the bank, every measured word, every deliberate pause had been a signal. She knew that in spaces where bias was unchecked, the smallest moments of authority could have the greatest impact. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from a senior corporate partner. "We've heard about the morning. Call me ASAP." Breonna allowed herself a faint, controlled smile. The ripple was becoming a wave. The world was beginning to notice. And when the time came, she would ensure that everyone involved understood the full weight of their misjudgment. Even the teller, unaware of the wider implications, had unknowingly triggered a chain of events that extended far beyond the bank. And Breonna Parker had every intention of guiding that chain to a powerful conclusion. The evening city lights glittered outside Breonna's office window, but inside her mind was far from the skyline. Each interaction from the day, the teller, the bank staff, the murmurs of bystanders, had begun to intertwine with larger threads of influence and consequence. Messages from partners and colleagues continued to arrive, each one hinting at shifts in perception, subtle recalibrations of authority, and the quiet acknowledgement of someone who could not be underestimated. Her assistant cleared her throat cautiously. "Breonna, some of the senior team at the bank has asked for a direct conversation. They're concerned about potential disruptions to ongoing operations." Breonna allowed herself the briefest pause, considering her words carefully. "Very well," she said, "but let's ensure this conversation is framed properly. Facts only, no assumptions." As she reviewed notes and schedules, she considered the broader picture. In her professional world, partnerships were rarely simple. Every deal, every negotiation, and every contract carried stakes that extended far beyond the individuals in a room. The incident at the bank, though seemingly minor, had revealed attitudes and vulnerabilities that could not be ignored. She knew that once the scope of her influence became known, the reactions would be immediate and intense. People would begin to measure their words, reconsider their assumptions, and confront the reality of what it meant to underestimate Breonna Parker. Somewhere in the back of her mind, the $7 billion partnership, one of the largest her company had ever undertaken, loomed silently. She had not mentioned it today. Few could have imagined its significance from the brief confrontation at the bank. Yet its relevance was undeniable. The morning's events were a reminder. Bias, arrogance, and dismissiveness were often challenged most effectively when they collided with real power. Her phone buzzed again. this time with a message from a corporate partner. We need your insight on the bank issue before it escalates. Can we meet? Breonna exhaled lightly. The dominoes were set. The world was beginning to align with her reality, even if those at the bank could not yet see it. And when the moment came to reveal the full scope of her influence, the impact would be undeniable. The next morning, Breonna Parker arrived at the bank once again, though this time the energy in the air was different. Where tension had ruled yesterday, anticipation now lingered. Staff and customers alike seemed aware that something significant had shifted, though they couldn't yet articulate why. The manager approached first, his steps deliberate. "Miss Parker," he said, voice measured, "before we proceed, there's something you should know. Our corporate offices have reviewed the situation and—" Breonna listened quietly, allowing the words to unfold without interruption. She had expected this. Every ripple from the previous day had built to this moment. "We've realized that you are the CEO behind one of our most critical partnerships," the manager continued. "The $7 billion partnership that accounts for a significant portion of the bank's operations and growth." A hush fell over the lobby. Even the teller, who had acted with arrogance only hours before, froze. Recognition replaced hostility, though it was laced with disbelief. Breonna held her folder, composed, letting the gravity of the revelation settle naturally. She spoke carefully, deliberately. "That's correct. And while the value of a partnership is measured in dollars, its integrity is measured in how people are treated." The manager nodded. Staff glanced at each other, realization dawning. The power dynamic had shifted entirely. Respect, once withheld, was now demanded. Not by intimidation, but by presence, professionalism, and undeniable influence. Customers whispered among themselves, some quietly admiring, others astonished. The teller's earlier dismissiveness now seemed foolish, even reckless. The morning's actions, meant to assert control, had inadvertently showcased the very gap in judgment he had failed to recognize. Breonna's gaze swept across the room. She wasn't seeking vindication. She was illustrating a truth that those present could no longer ignore. Authority and respect were not granted automatically. They were earned, acknowledged, and sometimes reminded. The manager extended a hand. "Ms. Parker, on behalf of the bank, I apologize for the incident, and thank you for handling it as you did." Breonna accepted the gesture with grace. "It's not just about apologies," she said. "It's about ensuring fairness. Every interaction matters, no matter how small it seems." And in that moment, the morning confrontation, once a simple test of patience and composure, became a statement, one that rippled far beyond the bank's walls. The world had seen Breonna Parker not just as a customer, but as a leader whose presence, judgment, and influence were undeniable. Within hours of the bank incident, murmurs had started to spread beyond the branch. Staff discussions, internal memos, and quiet phone calls to corporate offices had sparked curiosity among higher-ups. What had seemed like a small confrontation now carried weight far beyond the immediate setting. By mid-afternoon, an email from the bank's regional director circulated quietly. "Incident at branch involving Miss Breonna Parker requires review. Staff behavior and management response to be assessed immediately." Meanwhile, in the business world, whispers began to circulate. Partners who had previously interacted with Breonna's company noticed the story circulating on professional networks. The combination of poise, authority, and the hint of her influence was becoming a talking point. People began asking quietly, "Who is this woman who can shift the balance in a matter of minutes?" In her office, Breonna monitored the situation without panic. This was not chaos, it was influence taking shape. Each report, each message, and each reaction served as confirmation. Respect and accountability could not be ignored. She knew that the actions of one teller and a few staff members had unintentionally created a window into the culture of their institution. Her assistant glanced at her nervously. "Some of the bank's senior partners are discussing public communication strategies. They're concerned about media coverage." Breonna considered this. "Let them be concerned," she said calmly. "We handle facts, not assumptions. Any story will reflect what actually happened, not what they imagine." Outside, customers and onlookers began sharing their own accounts. Disbelief, admiration, and shock traveled in whispers. The narrative was forming on its own, guided by those who had seen her composure and fairness firsthand. At the branch, the teller and supporting staff were now aware that the incident had consequences beyond their control. Some apologized quietly, others avoided her gaze entirely. But Breonna was not seeking apologies. She was demonstrating a principle. How one treated others, even in small encounters, reflected character, and power always carried accountability. The ripple of a morning confrontation had now expanded to a wave reaching the bank's corporate offices, partners, and even the larger professional community. And Breonna Parker, with measured steps and deliberate presence, was at the center, quietly, firmly, undeniably. By the following morning, the incident at the bank had begun to draw attention beyond the building itself. Social media feeds buzzed with snippets from eyewitness accounts, brief videos captured on smartphones, and discussions about how a simple bank transaction had spiraled into a confrontation that exposed assumptions and bias. "Did you see that video of the CEO at the bank?" one professional tweeted. "Handled it perfectly, calm, composed, unshakable." News outlets began tracking the story. Journalists reached out to the bank for comments, while some managed to verify details from witnesses. Across the city, conversations revolved around respect, authority, and the subtle yet pervasive undercurrents of racial bias. In her office, Breonna Parker monitored the growing coverage. She had anticipated ripple effects, but the speed and scope of public attention reminded her that influence moved quickly once unleashed. She didn't panic. She assessed. Each report, each mention, was a reflection of the truth. Her composure, professionalism, and the unjust treatment she endured. Her assistant approached cautiously. "Some news outlets are requesting interviews. They want your perspective on the incident." Breonna's expression remained calm, controlled. "Facts only," she said. "We don't need speculation. Let's ensure the narrative reflects reality, not assumptions or sensationalism." Meanwhile, the bank's internal communications were in overdrive. Management instructed staff to document the incident, assess procedural failures, and prepare for inquiries. The teller, who had once carried himself with unquestioned authority, now faced scrutiny from supervisors and colleagues. Supporting staff, too, realized the incident had broader implications than they had imagined. Outside, the public's interest continued to grow. Conversations on social media focused not only on Breonna's poise, but also on the systemic issues her encounter had revealed. Commentators debated fairness, respect, and the hidden biases that often influence seemingly routine interactions. Breonna understood that the morning confrontation had evolved into something larger. What had started as a single moment of disrespect had transformed into a public reflection of power, authority, and the consequences of underestimating someone. And through it all, Breonna Parker remained composed, aware that every observer, every report, and every conversation was part of the larger story, one that would not conclude quietly, and one that would eventually reveal her full influence to the world. By mid-morning, Breonna Parker received a direct call from one of the senior partners at the bank's corporate office. The line connected swiftly, and the voice on the other end carried measured urgency. "Miss Parker," the partner began, "we need to discuss the morning incident. The teller and supporting staff have been called in for a review, and senior management wants guidance on next steps." Breonna's response was deliberate. "I've already documented the events," she said. "The facts speak for themselves. Ensure they are reviewed objectively, without personal bias influencing judgment." The partner hesitated for a brief moment. "Understood. We also want to discuss the impact on ongoing partnerships. Your presence at the branch, it's made staff reconsider certain protocols. Your perspective could help us navigate this without further disruption." Breonna allowed herself a faint smile. Even small actions can send ripples, she thought. A momentary display of calm authority at the counter had triggered reconsideration at multiple levels, far beyond what the teller could have imagined. "Hey, Nori, prepare a clear summary of events," she said. "Highlight procedural adherence and points of improvement, but frame it professionally. Avoid unnecessary dramatization. Accuracy will convey the seriousness." The conversation ended, leaving Breonna with a renewed sense of control. She had taken what could have been a humiliating encounter and transformed it into an opportunity for systemic reflection and accountability. Meanwhile, within the bank, the teller and supporting staff were summoned individually. The teller, once confident in his unchecked authority, now faced scrutiny. Reports were being reviewed, video evidence compiled, and witness accounts analyzed. Supporting staff realized the magnitude of what had occurred, their earlier complicity now weighing heavily. Breonna knew the broader professional world was watching. Partners, competitors, and clients were observing, often quietly, weighing decisions, respect, and trust in ways most would never admit. What had started as a single encounter had already begun to ripple beyond immediate interactions, influencing perceptions and shaping conversations she would never hear directly. She gathered her belongings, letting the day's intensity settle in her mind. There was work still to be done, of course, but for now, the world could wait. Some battles required action, others required patience, reflection, and clarity of thought. As she stepped out of the office and into the cool evening air, she allowed herself to shift focus from professional strategy to something far more personal: home, family, and the lessons she wanted to leave behind. The city lights flickered around her as she made her way through familiar streets. In the quiet of her car, she considered the importance of her presence, the subtle ways influence had already moved through unseen channels, and the responsibility that came with it. And as she turned the key in her front door, Breonna Parker knew that the next moments spent in the company of her children would be just as consequential as any boardroom decision. Breonna Parker finally closed the door behind her, shedding the weight of the day along with her coat. The sounds of the city dimmed, replaced by the soft laughter and chatter of her two children playing in the living room. The aroma of dinner, roasted vegetables, and baked chicken wafted gently from the kitchen. For the first time that day, she allowed herself to breathe. Her children, Maya and Eli, were sprawled across the floor, coloring books open and crayons scattered. Their laughter, light and uninhibited, reminded her of what truly mattered. She smiled, crouching beside them. "How was your day?" she asked, her voice calm, but carrying the warmth of someone fully present. Maya looked up, curious. "Mom, you seem different today." "Serious," Breonna chuckled softly. "Sometimes we have days where we learn something important, days that teach us about people, about ourselves, and about the world." She guided them toward the sofa, gesturing for them to sit. "Tonight, I want to share a story with you." Her children's eyes widened. Stories from their mother were never ordinary. They were filled with lessons and truths the world often forgot. "There's something you need to know," Breonna began. "Sometimes people will try to judge you, underestimate you, or treat you unfairly. They may make assumptions about who you are before they even listen. That can happen anywhere: school, work, or even just going out to do something ordinary. And that is not okay." Eli frowned slightly. "Why would someone do that?" "Because they forget," Breonna replied softly, "that everyone deserves respect. They may act out of fear, ignorance, or pride. But here's the thing: you can't control what others do. What you can control is how you respond. You can let anger or frustration take over, or you can stand firm, calmly and confidently, and show them who you are through your actions." Maya's hand rested on a crayon, paused mid-color. "Like you do at work?" Breonna nodded. "Exactly. Every time you face a challenge, you have a choice. You can react in a way that escalates the situation, or you can respond in a way that asserts your dignity and teaches the other person a lesson without shouting or being mean. That's real strength." Eli's eyes lit up. "So, strength isn't just about being strong like superheroes?" Breonna smiled, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "No, Eli. Strength is about patience, presence, and understanding your own power. It's about standing up for yourself calmly, even when the world doubts you. And when you do that, people notice. Even if they don't say it, they remember it." Her children were quiet for a moment, taking in her words. Maya leaned against her mother. Does it hurt when people treat you badly? Breonna thought carefully. Sometimes, yes, but it also teaches you something. It reminds you that your value isn't defined by what others think, and it shows you who has character and who doesn't. You learn to protect your dignity and help others understand it too. She reached for the coloring books on the table. I want you both to remember something important. Life will challenge you. People will judge you, sometimes unfairly. But if you stand firm, if you act with respect and courage, you can change the way people see you, and sometimes even the way they see themselves. Maya smiled, picking up a crayon again. So it's like turning a bad day into a lesson? Breonna nodded, proud. Exactly. Every day teaches us something, and the way we respond can inspire others, even if we don't realize it right away. Strength isn't loud, it's steady, it's enduring, and it's most powerful when it's paired with kindness and fairness. Eli leaned into her side. Mom, I think I understand. It's like showing people how to be better. Yes, Breonna said, hugging him close. It's about showing the world the best of yourself and teaching others by example. That's how change happens. One person, one moment, one decision at a time. They spent the evening coloring together, but the lesson lingered. Breonna knew that these conversations, quiet, intimate, and deliberate, were as important as any professional victory. The strength she demonstrated in the outside world was reflected here, at home, shaping the next generation. As the children prepared for bed, Breonna tucked them in, whispering the final thought she wanted them to carry. Always remember, my loves, the world will try to measure you in ways that aren't fair, but your worth is in how you act, how you respond, and how you treat others, even when they don't expect it. That is power. That is dignity. That is you. She watched them drift off to sleep, breathing softly in the quiet apartment. For all the challenges the world would throw at her, and at them she felt a rare sense of peace. Tonight, the lessons of the day were shared, and tomorrow would bring another chance to stand firm, to act wisely, and to influence the world in ways both large and subtle. Breonna Parker finally allowed herself to sit back in the living room, letting the calm wash over her. The city hummed outside, distant and indifferent, but within these walls, she had anchored strength, resilience, and understanding. And she knew, as she looked out at the night sky, that these lessons, quiet, patient, enduring, would ripple far beyond this evening, shaping not just her children, but the way they would navigate a world that often underestimated them. Her phone buzzed softly on the table. Breonna glanced at the screen. The caller was unknown, but the number carried a sense of urgency. She answered, voice calm yet alert. Miss Parker, said a clipped, professional voice. We need to discuss today's incident. It's drawn attention at levels you might not expect. Breonna's eyes narrowed slightly. She listened, letting the words sink in. The world she thought she had controlled, the careful influence she wielded, was shifting in ways she hadn't yet imagined. Yet she felt no fear, only clarity. When she hung up, a small, knowing smile touched her lips. The ripple of her actions was spreading further than she had anticipated. Tonight had ended, but tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, and new ways to demonstrate strength, patience, and dignity. She looked out at the city lights, calm, composed, and ready. The world was watching, and Breonna Parker was prepared to show it exactly who she was. The world will challenge you. It will doubt you. It will measure your worth unfairly. But strength isn't about shouting or proving someone wrong. Strength is calm. Strength is steady. Strength is knowing your value, standing for it, and teaching others what respect means, without losing yourself. If you were in Breonna Parker's shoes, how would you respond? Would you stand firm, even when the world doubts you? Comment below and let us know your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of courage, resilience, and powerful lessons from real-life struggles. Hit the like button if Breonna's story inspired you, and share this video so more people can see the strength it takes to stand tall in the face of injustice.